trees in the backwoods night. Red lights cutting through the pine in flight. Bigfoot stomping with his youngling beard. Whispers of tales that ain't too clear. UFOs buzzing solo through the haze. Howling banshees set the forest ablaze. Jersey devil howls drink rays to the sky. Drunken cryptids party until the morning's night. Yeah. It's showtime, running wild in the moonlight. Stars burn down, watch the freaks all take flight.
To good times.
Raise your glasses to the mysteries divine. It's showtime, let the...
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Drunken Cryptids. Yes, I'm still dealing with a bout of laryngitis. So for those of you listening, I apologize. But I've got a great guest coming back for his part 2 like we talked about before. And this has been a topic of mine that I have been extremely passionate about. And, well, I say passionate, I say fascinated with, because there's such an allure. There's such a, magic to it. There's just something about these creatures that for some reason that we have glorified through novels, comic books, through Hollywood. Hollywood kind of glamorizes everything. And they've been painted as villains. They've been painted as heroes. They've been painted as in between. They've been painted as, victims of their own circumstances. And I mean, these characters have been throughout history. These creatures, I say not characters, but these creatures have been painted throughout history, all the way through, even a little bit into the biblical times, to where, referencing some of the stuff in the Bible of the commandments and what we're not supposed to do and stuff. And, and the guest I'm going to have on, we're going to dig into a lot of fun topics. And, when you go down this topic here, when I bring it up, it gets into, well, if you've already read the show description, you already know what I'm talking about. But this is going to get into, there's a lot of rabbit holes. And me and Ron Murphy coming back for his part 2, we're going to start going down some of these rabbit holes. And, Ron actually wrote a very fascinating novel on it. I didn't read it. I did do it on audio, and I highly recommend it. It's on Audible, you guys. So please go check it out. It's his take on it's going to be really good. And we're going to get into some of the, the literature of how, and he discusses this in his novel as well, by the way, of how these creatures became so, I don't know, like the symbolism of, beauty and sexual power and lust and greed and all of that and evil. That's the one thing that a lot of these novels seem to skip over, is that evil aspect of it. And no matter what, everybody wants to be one. When I was growing up, I wanted to hunt them. That was the funny part. So I found that fascinating. Before we go any further, though, into the episode, I bring him on. I do want to say blademedia.com. Thank you very much, Dylan, for all the hard work. Thank you, Tommy, for everything you're doing behind the show. Don't forget, you guys, June 6th of 2026, we are doing the first Arkansas Cryptid Fest. It's going to be at Old Bart's in North Little Rock, 600 North Broadway. Check the show links. Check out the Facebook page, Arkansas Cryptid Fest, and check out the Drunken Cryptids Facebook page as well. The events and everything are posted up there. Guest speakers, we got some great speakers already lined up. On the VIP ticket, you've got Todd Neese. You're going to have Betsy. You're going to have, ready? Cryptids of the Corn, Justin and Jay are coming as well. Rod Nichols from Bear County, Texas is coming in as well to speak. And of course, I'm going to be a speaker as well. So that's on the VIP ticket. Check out the Eventbrite and everything. So, but without further, and of course, check out the Patreon page, you guys. We got some bonus episodes up there as well. Buy me a coffee and keep liking and sharing the show. I appreciate everything you're doing. And if you've had an account and you want to come to the show, email me, drunkencryptids@gmail.com. Ron, how you doing, buddy?
Matthew, it's a pleasure to be here, my friend. I am sorry to hear about your throat situation there, but I will tell you, 'tis the season here in Western Pennsylvania, where I'm talking to you from right now. There is definitely something in the air that's causing quite a sinus infection with me. But I do have a voice, and this is one of my favorite topics, and I'm looking to let's sink our teeth into this, shall we?
Yeah, no pun intended on the sinking our teeth into it. And I agree wholeheartedly. Excuse me. Sorry.
Yeah.
Raw and unfiltered. Something's in the air. So I was just, a little over a week ago, I was at the Arkansas Paranormal Expo, had a blast, met a whole bunch of new fans. Everybody that I met there, you guys, thank you very much for coming up and buying t-shirts and shaking hands and just asking questions. It was a great time. Met some wonderful people. And on Sunday morning of it, I woke up with a sore throat and I was like, man, I think I'm getting, I was like, maybe I snored or, you know what I mean? One of those things.
Uh-huh.
By 11 o'clock, Chris had taken over talking for me. I was sitting with Betsy. She had her booth was right beside us. And I was sitting with her and I was watching. I was going, I don't have to do anything. And she goes, you don't feel good. I was like, no, I don't. And noon we packed it up and my kids were like, okay, we're going home. Yay. And, we got home and my daughter even goes, Dad, you don't look good. And I was like, I'm not. And sure enough, I woke up Monday morning at 3:00, shivering, covered in sweat. And I was like, oh, whatever it is, it's got me good. So I ended up missing 2 days of work last week. And the kids were right there helping me out and powering through. And, and then, boom, but the show's got to go on. You know how it is. You got to keep going. So
it's got to go on. That's right. So, not to go too far down another path here before we get into vampires, but I really find that awesome about you is because you take your kids to some of these events, don't you?
I do. Yeah. So whenever I can, I will. Which is because the thing about it is I do want my kids to understand that there is a wonderful paranormal aspect to the world, but there's and also to be wary of it as well. And to have fun, and that's the fun thing about it. My little boy loves it. My daughter, he went with me last year to it. My daughter had soccer games going on, so she wasn't able to go. So this year, this was her first year, and they had fun. They were, they would wander around with me, or they'd wander around with Jacob or Chris or Tommy, and they'd wander around and look at everybody's booths and displays, and they come back and go, they had a Mothman, or they had this, or And that was that was the fun part about it. And, I want them to get a chance to, explore the world without viewing it through a tablet.
Yeah, amen, brother. And that's the thing is, I usually take at least a couple of my kids on trips as well with me because it's a great bonding time. Also, it's that part of my life that I want to have open for them as well too, because it really made me who I am today. Because my mother was into this, so it's kind of like a family tradition. But I like to see this kind of stuff happening. And whenever I do a conference, one of my favorite things to see is people bringing their kids to it. I think it's important to keep this stuff alive and going, and unless we get kids involved, this will eventually peter out, not go anywhere. But yeah, the curiosity in a child's eyes whenever they're presented with the unknown is an amazing thing to see.
You're absolutely right. And what we'll do too is that, depending upon the weather, because it gets really hot in Arkansas, and I hate saying it, but kids today aren't as tough as we were back when we were kids.
You're right about that.
And I hate saying that. I really do. I'm not trying to attack anybody out there. I mean, my kids are the same way. I mean, they're on tablets and stuff. But, so we'll try and go outside. My little boy loves to go out bug hunting. He loves to be outside to a point. And, in Little Rock, they've got, the Arkansas Game and Fish. They have a natural museum set up, and it's free to the public. And they have, fish in there that are alive. They got some reptiles and some amphibians. And my kids love going there. They'll do, they have these little scavenger hunts. So you have to go through and look for certain animals and go through the whole entire, museum. And they'll spend, 2 hours in there. Just, and that's that curiosity I want them to have. So when I take them to the woods, even if, we'll go to Pinnacle Mountain just for a simple hike around the little lake or something like that. It's for them, and they're paying attention. And the only way that we're going to be able to conserve a lot of our woodlands and to conserve a lot of our nature is to get the kids involved.
Oh, see, that's the point that I was going to make, actually, and that's a perfect point. So I take my children with me, Sterling and Ronan. These are my two youngest boys, and what happens is to see when we're talking about cryptids, whether it's Bigfoot or Dogman or whatever. They belong to a world that is separated from our world, right? They belong to a world of the wilderness and the forest and the trees. And what happens is, and you hit the nail right on the head, what happens is whenever children are involved in that kind of pursuit of the unknown, they tend to respect and take on an air of stewardship about the environment around them, because unless we continue to have wild places, we'll no longer have things that go bump in the night. So I applaud you, and I applaud anybody that takes their children to these kind of things, because it is essential to who we are. As we're going to talk about vampires a little bit later, these things are embroidered into our DNA. They mean something to us from a very human level, right? And it's odd that it's 2025, but we're still talking about vampires now. But yeah, so I think that whenever we take kids out there, they look at the world far differently than if they were sitting and playing video games all day, or whatever they do nowadays. Because I know as a kid we were always out in the woods, and to this day I still get very sad whenever I see things strip mined and a forest torn down to put up a strip mall. There's nothing worse that can happen for me.
No, I agree. Like the woods here in Arkansas, when I was a kid, that I used to play in is now a complete neighborhood.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Me too.
It's
So
a huge subdivision. I mean, every part
yep.
of the woods that I was in is gone. And I can go, so right there, those people's windows are at, that's where I would walk into the woods.
Same thing with me. So there was these two frog ponds that we used to go to all the time as kids, and now that's part of a subdivision. I think there's probably a basketball court over one of them, and all those wild places where my friends and I would go in and we'd scare ourselves and we think that we were being tracked by Bigfoot. The first time I ever saw a deer, the first time I ever saw a fox and a skunk and all those kind of things were in these woods, right? This is wherever I had my first initiation into animals and trees and all this other stuff. It's all gone, right? And we can drive and see a subdivision anytime we want to, but it still brings awe to me whenever I see a deer. And there's plenty of deer in Pennsylvania, and I still get giddy whenever I see wild things, because it's so part of who we are. We tend to forget that we are part of this the world around us, but we have decided that we would separate ourselves from this world. And I think that's, as we talk about vampires, we talk about cryptids, what these things represent is kind of like they're personifications of these wild places, and they are confronting us about how we respond to such places. I think it's very interesting from a lot of different views, not only from a cryptozoological view and think that there might be an animal out there that's hidden from science, that's uncatalogued and all that stuff. That's great, right? But also the idea of archetypes and the idea that there is still this essential part of the collective unconscious that still does exist out there in the wilderness, whether it's in their living beings or not, they still exist in that liminal zone of the woods. And we need to keep these places still wild, because one of the worst things that we can do is domesticate things that we fear, because that makes us far less human.
You are absolutely 100% correct on that one. And I remember when I was a kid, I wanted to be like Indiana Jones. I wanted to travel. I wanted to explore. I wanted to discover. And I remember I was in elementary school, and I think I brought this up before in another episode. I can't remember if you and me talked about it or not. So I apologize if I've already brought it up again to you. But I had a teacher actually tell me that go discover what? Everything has been discovered. And that kind of was a downer to me. And looking at it now, I'm like, no. My little boy, Ben, he is so fascinated with spiders and bugs. And he's like, I want to go and discover spiders. And I was like, well, son, that's kind of cryptozoology right there. They're out there. They just haven't been discovered yet. And there's so many creatures, and there's so much that is yet to still be discovered. And the world is such a fascinating place. And, since you did bring it up already, so I will start leading us into that path with our beautiful topic of vampires and how vampires have played a really important role, not only in our modern day culture, but throughout culture throughout history and all over the world. These are beings that have been featured and talked about throughout history, throughout the world's history. Not just, everybody has this idea of medieval, Europe. That's where the vampires, and Dracula, and it goes so much further than that.
It does. It goes probably back to the very dawn of humanity. I opened up my book on vampires discussing this theory that I have. Not so much a theory. I look at the archaeological evidence, and then I kind of try to trace it back to as far as I can. And then with those details that we have in the archaeological record, I try to form some sort of picture about what was going on. So we know that if we go back to the end of the last ice age, sometime around 14,000 years ago, that, these were still harsh conditions, right? So let's look at England, for example, right? So England was home to wolves and bear, and it was home to, megafauna, right? Mammoths and lions. This was all part of England. And we know from looking at anthropology and looking and studying human remains in England at 14,000 years ago, this is what some anthropologists have delineated, actually they called it, England was the land of the living dead. And the reason that is because more people were dying than were being born, right? This is a very harsh condition. It's basically kind of like tundra steppes that you would see in places like Mongolia is how England would have been. So people were struggling to stay alive. Humanity was struggling to have some sort of foothold in that particular space. We were being preyed upon. We were not apex predators. We were at the very bottom of the food chain. So, one of the ways we see how humans lived in antiquity is by studying, their, middens, which is kind of like their little garbage dumps where they would throw away things, and looking at, in these kind of places you would find processed bones, so we could see what they were eating. So we know that a lot of people were eating horses, and they were eating, deer and all these other kind of animals. But there was one particular place called Go's Cave, which is in the Cheddar Gorge area of England, right where we get our cheddar cheese from. And it was interesting because part of the archaeological excavation uncovered a place where animals were processed for food. And, like I said, the various animal remains were there. But among those remains, not set aside, nothing was special about this. This was just a part of the processing, was three human beings, a child, probably a young adult, and a teenager. So these human beings were processed for food, simply because human beings are a lot easier to catch than, a muskox or something like that. So we know that people were being preyed upon. But what is happening at the Go Cave site in the Cheddar Gorge is that we see humans emerging from the underworld. I mean, they're coming out of caves, probably hunting at night, taking people that were the easiest ones to take. Children, have always been preyed upon by the vampire, and this is one of those examples whenever you can see it beginning in time. This is the genesis of those ideas and those fears. But what makes this so utterly vampiric is that those skulls of those humans were then turned into goblets and inside those goblets, inside those skull goblets, those cups, was remains of human blood that was presumably being drunk by these people that did the slaughtering. So we could see that times were so drastic that these people were apparently consuming blood to stay alive, and we know that blood can be quite poisonous to human beings. So it was probably doing more harm than good. But we can see, again, we have these elements of darkness and things rising up. And we have to understand, too, that at this time, a lot of times, caves were being used as burial places for humans. So we put this all together and we see that something comes out of the place reserved for burial to feast upon the living, and then they return back into this underworld, and then you also have this whole correlation with everything else that are coming out too. So in my theory here, that the things that go bump in the night, the things that scare us the most, we did indeed encounter them in our ancient past in a very real way, to the point that they became archetypes, and the memory of that stuff haunts us to this very day.
Okay, so I love the historical part, how you break that down into possibly the beginnings, and so I'm going to come at it from a supernatural, kind of a paranormal, even cryptid field. What if what was discovered in the cave was actually, remnants of actual a vampire clan or something tied, to the vampire itself? Because you brought it up to where human blood is not good for humans. Now, here's the funny part about that. So dogs will eat dogs, cats will eat cats, birds will eat birds. Okay, animals will eat each other. If we do that, we actually there's plenty of history of cannibalism that's gone on. But the physical side effects of, I was trying to look it up, and instead I ended up pulling up, the bad side of drinking human blood. There's more harm that happens to our physical health, our health, actually. Our bodies don't process it right. It's like toxin to us. So it's not something that's highly recommended at all for anybody to do, to where even if you just do just a few, more than a few tablespoons of blood, you could have an iron overload. It could cause major damage to your liver. It can nausea, vomiting. A whole bunch of bad things that can take place to you, on the health side. And, just like looking at it, disease transmission, iron overload, liver damage, heart complications, heart disease, diabetes, joint pain. There's all this stuff just from ingesting our own blood per se of our own species. So what is it about? So what is it about the vampire then that lives on human blood and actually hunts humans? Do you think that maybe there's some kind of correlation of the uncanny valley, to where of us being hunted, early man being hunted by other creatures, and that might be kind of where the vampire comes from?
Yeah, sure. I'm a huge proponent of the uncanny valley. We could do a show on this someday all by itself. I think that we should. I think that that's good. But the reason why there are people like you and I out there is because what we do is we gather the academic information and we go down rabbit holes that colleges and universities and professors don't go down. So we find this very strange site in a cave, in situ, right, in the archaeological record, right? We find it, and it's showing that things were happening there that doesn't make sense from an anatomically human point of view, right? So what was going on there? The ingestion of blood and everything like that. Basically, if these were humans in there, they were poisoning themselves, right? So instead of staying alive, they were actually dwindling their life expectancy by doing such a thing, okay? So now we do have to ask ourselves, is there something paranormal? Is there something supernatural? Or is there even something cryptid related to this?
Correct. In my mind goes a lot of that. So I'm not saying that there's not a lot of, people out there who are going to, because throughout history we've seen it. like right now, I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer is still like, he's got his own Netflix series. He's got this, he was cooking things. But he wasn't ingesting too much of it raw. Of course, we know the Donner Party that took place, and then of course we could get into the Wendigo as well, the Native Americans who preach against this. But what's funny is that throughout man's history, it's always been preached and taught not to, and not even from a Christian perspective, from a cultural perspective, not to ingest other humans. The Aztecs and the Mayans and the Incas down there, they weren't, they were doing human sacrifices, but they were not ingesting.
No, I know what you're talking about. Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, in our collective human closet, the skeleton of cannibalism does loom very large, right? But we're talking about something far different, right? We're talking about like the Donner Party, whenever that was essential, right? And then we have this religious attitude in the Maya and the Aztec whenever they were doing human sacrifices. But in these other kind of very uncanny excavations that we have, we see that people are being eaten, and their blood being absorbed as well too, by creatures that this should not be beneficial for, but obviously were. So it seems as if there was we talk about like the idea of a life force or whatever. It seems that something was keeping these ancient entities alive by the consuming of human flesh and blood. And again, I mean, is it something, are we talking about, was this done by humans? Could this be done by Neanderthals or Denisovans? Was there another type of human out there that was able to process things that would be otherwise poisonous, but to a beneficial way? So it's very possible that what we call vampires were some sort of extinct hominids that we no longer even recognize, and maybe we haven't even found their remains yet, that haunt our human ancestry.
Well, okay, so yeah, all right, I'm going to piggyback on that one real quick, Dan, and say, okay, so if we go up the legend of the vampire, so the vampire is a human who can grow fangs. Okay, so it can do a transformation, can grow fangs. So if it was to perish, 14,000 years ago, all right, and we do find the remains of it, we are going to go ahead and assume that it is a human.
Right, a human. That's exactly right. Exactly right.
Because even some of the the grave sites that they've actually of alleged vampires, here in the States and over in Europe, when they've been exhumed, there was nothing deformatory about the remains.
Oh, absolutely. That's right. They perceived them to be vampires, even though they didn't have, superhuman strength, or they didn't have, fangs or anything like that. But they were still assumed to be vampires. So what you're saying is absolutely correct. That's right. Unless we find something that, distinguishes them outside of the typical a human skeleton, those human remains. But one of the things I will say, when we talk about, the growing of the teeth and the transforming into bats and everything, this was not part of our understanding of the vampire until Bram Stoker's Dracula came out, right? And then he kind of sets up the rules for how this is supposed to work. And I think, that was a great literary work, but it also kind of did us a disservice as we investigate these creatures, because there are vampire traditions from all around the world, and we like to focus on this, this Eastern European melding with this, kind of British Owls type of sensibility. In Britain, they have their own brand as well too. So now we have a conglomeration of different types of folkways. But around the world, Native Americans even had traditions of the vampire, and they were all seemed to be not so much human, but different from, but similar to humans. And that may be closer to the truth of the creatures that we're looking for.
You're absolutely right on that one. And I think, Bram Stoker, had a great idea, basing everything off of Vlad the Impaler, taking it, romancing it, and of course, and then they did the movie Nosferatu, which is just a version of Dracula. And of course, and, then we know the classic story when it does turn into a bad, has to do this. But there has to be something tied into. You did take some really interesting lore and legend with it as well. They have to stay with their own, dirt from their own country. That's what they have to be kept in, or be around, or they're going to suffer. But, it's I'm trying to, okay. Yeah. My thoughts just went completely, I was going
No, I
somewhere
know
with
what
it.
you're talking about. Yeah, he's the guy that kind of formulates how a vampire works within the world, right? And without him, we wouldn't have any of these kind of things, and that's necessary to have, right? So we have a bit of Vlad the Impaler there, but also Bram Stoker was from Ireland, and as it happens, there is a fairy creature there called wait for it, called the Dracula, which sounds remarkably like Dracula, and these little fairies live out in the moors, and they wait upon roads to feast upon the blood of unwary travelers. They also are said to have a castle out in the middle of nowhere as well too. So I think what Stoker does is he takes his knowledge of the Irish folklore, right? Then he grabs on a little bit of Vlad the Impaler, and he kind of puts it in a mixing bowl and whisks it all up and adds a little bit of this, a little bit of that, until the point that you come out now with a very new look at the way the vampire operates within the ancient world. But I think that is at the end of the evolutionary process of the vampire, because before that, we see all different types of functioning monsters. One of my favorite is the Strigoi, which is this creature that Vlad the Impaler would have known about. He wouldn't have known so much about the vampire as he would the Strigoi, which is this. It's hard to say if it is a reincarnated human corpse or not. It might be a spirit, or it might be a creature itself. Sometimes they were saying that if a human was cursed by a witch, or if a human was born with red hair or out of wedlock, or wasn't baptized, they could become a Strigoi. But it seems as if the Strigoi itself is some sort of possessing spirit that takes over the body. But the Strigoi, they were a little bit different in that the way that they fed, they didn't bite the neck. That's a very Victorian thing, that they would have actually bit over the heart and sucked the blood directly from the heart, or bit somebody on the face over the nose and gain access to the blood that way. So what we do with Bram Stoker is we have a very Victorian account, who has rules to follow. He can work within polite society. He has money, but he's still that dark side of humanity as well too, right? He still haunts the shadows. He still, he come out in the daytime, but he doesn't have all those kind of powers or anything. So we see a human being that is both man and beast at the same time, and that to the Victorian sensibility, as well as to us in the 21st century, we find that very disturbing.
You're absolutely right. So real quick, for those who don't know what a Strigoi are beings from Romanian folklore. Often they're translated as a type of vampire or a troubled spirit, and they rise from the grave to prey on the living. Unlike modern vampires, these guys are actually really, really ugly, and you don't want to see them. Kind of like what your classic zombie would look like if it came out of the grave 100 years ago. After being dead for 100 years. So you brought up the sunlight thing, and that triggered something for me as well. So I'm going to get to a little bit of into the Bible here. I'm going to jump into Cain and Abel, to where Cain, in a lot of circles, is recognized as the first vampire. that
You're
when
absolutely right. That. This is a good point to bring up. We're not going to talk that much about it, but also in some traditions as well, he becomes the atypical wild man as well. And there are some people believe that he also reflects the Bigfoot archetype as well. But yeah, let's focus on the vampire for now.
Okay, so on the vampire side of it, so let's go. So we know that Cain kills Abel over jealousy because Abel got was favored by God, and God shunned him. God booted him out, said, "See you later." And what gets me about that story too, though, is that he put a mark upon Cain, so that others, would not, they would recognize him or they wouldn't hurt him. But Cain was afraid to go out there. And my questions are afraid to go out. Why? If there was no other people at the time, why was he afraid? And then he goes and establishes, the city. Establishes the city. He gets wives. He does all this stuff. And again, where do these other people come from?
Right.
And that there's so many questions. And I'm not questioning the Bible. Trust me, folks. But I'm saying there's some parts that haven't been put in there, and that makes me believe that there was other humans here prior to Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve were made in Adam was made in God's image, hence he created Eve from Adam. And when they left the Garden of Eden, there was already other creatures and beings that were outside the garden. And come on, there was cherubs protecting the garden from what? So there was a whole bunch of stuff. Anyways, but if Cain is recognized as the father, because he was shunned from God's light, and a lot of people assume, and they talk about how the sun is God's light.
Sure.
And so, that's if you think about it, that would, technically that would be it. The sun is out, it's warm, it's comforting, it brings life, all the things that God is credited for. And then at night is when, it's dark, and you got to think, a couple, thousands of years ago, there was no electricity, there was no light pollution at all. You had to have a fire. If you didn't have a fire, you weren't seeing what was going on at night, because our eyes are not designed for the night at all. We can have our night sight where we can see things, but our vision at night is absolutely so drastically reduced. It's ridiculous. And and a lot of people say, well, they were accustomed to it back in the day. No. They had fire to bring warmth and light to the dark, is what they had. So, so now we have, we trace it back to the potential of the first vampire being Cain, and then we could bring it into also with, the legend of Lilith as well. Yep. And if you go into Lilith's story as well, and that was brought into, and you brought it into your book, which was awesome. She's not mentioned anywhere in the Bible biblically, but she is mentioned into these Jewish texts that were around 900 AD, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, we're still going back, and these are based upon oral tradition. So, if we're going back to a text that's around, 1000 AD, we have to say that it's been at least put out there probably 1,000, if not 2,000 years before that. And the reason why I say that is because Lilith shows up in a lot of different Mesopotamian traditions, like in Babylon. So we know that this character was not Jewish in invention, but was kind of appropriated by Jews, probably whenever they were in the diaspora and they were taken captive into other lands and such. So they probably knew about her. And one of the theories is that, in order to appease this deity, people sacrificed children, and there was definitely blood associated with her cult. Now, that may indeed be the fact, but I think what we were getting here in the Jewish tradition, however, and this is rabbinical commentary. This is something that definitely, in my opinion, predates the Torah in any way. That we're going back to these traditions as we were still, as the Jews were still a wandering people trying to find their way in this world. But we have the character of Lilith, like you said, and according to the rabbinic tradition, that Lilith was the first wife of Adam. And now what's interesting is we know that Eve was made from the rib of Adam. So in a way, a woman was made from a man, so you could see her even as kind of secondary in the creation, because without man, she would never have come into being. So it's kind of like she's dependent upon the male. But with Lilith, not so much. She is, consubstantial with the same material that Adam is made out of, right? Adam is made from the land itself, and so is she. So she's this very powerful figure that God himself made, just like he made Adam. Right, but again, this male patriarchy takes over, and Adam thinks that he needs to be in charge of everything, and there's a lot of sexual connotations in this as well too. But needless to say, we'll make it PG rated. So what happens is that Lilith refuses to simply serve Adam in any way, domestically and sexually. So he does not like this attitude that she has, and she is then cast from Eden. So she's expelled, she's excommunicated from Adam because he does not like the power that she wields over him. And she is set to wander the darkness around Eden, and in some traditions, she encounters a fallen angel, sometimes Satan himself, and they have children. And these children, because she was shunned from the Garden of Eden, these children that she raises, she indoctrinates into them that they are now to prey upon the children of men for the wrongdoing that became of Lilith. So now that they have these demonic creatures that are now out there preying upon people because of what we did to her. And we see not only is the first vampire female in Lilith, right? But also the offspring that is preying upon men are also female. So at the very beginning, we have the vampiric tradition has always been female. These females are now the succubus that go out there and they steal power from men as they sleep. And this is a scary thing. This turns the patriarchal world on its head. And then this is adopted by the Greeks, and this is adopted by the Romans in the Apuza and in the Lamia and these other type of creatures that are seem to be half human and half evil. Outside of the Judeo-Christian aspect, there seem to be things that live in the darkness. They live in the areas in the desert and everything where people tend to bury the dead. This is the place of contagion. This is the place of corpses, and this is where these creatures reside. And they come out of this darkness to feed on men, and it's just a scary situation because as a man, you're indefensible whenever you're sleeping, and to think that a woman, a female being can come into your house and rob you of your spirit while you sleep, and there's no defense against it. That's utterly terrifying.
You're right, and you bring that. What's funny too is that what's really strange right now in the past couple of years, Lilith has been making really, in our circle, in the genre of cryptids paranormal, Lilith's been making a really strange comeback. Which is I guess a bad term to use, but she's making a stronger appearance, I should say. She's appearing more and more. There seems to be some encounters with her. She's like to use the form of an owl. A lot of people use, reference the owl as being, Lilith, which is also funny too, because a lot of people reference alien abductions to, the Greys as owls.
Absolutely. And we can all look at that as well, too, because the iconography of Lilith is often depicted as the owl. And then whenever we see Lilith depicted in the Bible, and now it's kind of like reading between the lines. I do believe it might be in Deuteronomy, if I'm not mistaken. But instead of Lilith, they call her the Strix, which the S-T-R-I-X, which means something like, night owl or night predator. And the owl to this very day its name, its Greek name is the Strix. So if you look up the classification of an owl, it will be called the Strix, the same term that was applied to Lilith. So the idea that these are nighttime predators sticks with us even now.
One, you're absolutely right, and so it's funny because so I'll bring up Lilith a little bit more. So last year, on a personal encounter, this was kind of crazy. At my old place, the old tavern. Me and Jake were hanging out one night. It was a typical, I want to say it's a Saturday night. Everybody had been over. Saturday nights were the hangout spot. Everybody come over to the tavern and we drink and watch shows and play music and just kind of visit. Well, everybody had left. It was me and Jacob there, and it was about 1:00 in the morning. And I live in suburbia. I'm in the suburbs. We have raccoons and possums and all that other fun stuff. And very rarely will you hear or see an owl. But at 1:00 in the morning, this owl was so close, and the hoot that it gave out, me and Jacob jumped in our chairs, and I was just like, "What the?"
Mm-hmm.
A couple of days later, it was in the morning, and I had gone out front to do something. I was getting ready to go to work. So it was probably around 5:30, 5:45. No, it was raining. And I had stepped out my carport, cup of coffee, smoked a cigarette. And sure enough, across the street from me, this damn owl hooted 3 times. I was like going, okay. Fast forward about a month or so later, I was on Camp Robinson working. I was going down one of the range roads. There's nobody on it. It was, nothing was happening. Nobody been down there for quite a while. And I saw an owl. And I was like, no kidding. And I slowed down to get a picture of it. And as I got my phone up to take a picture, it flew. And it flew parallel down the road that I was traveling. And it landed. And I was like, okay. So I creeped down there, got my phone to take a picture of it. It took off again. So this owl was just kind of leading me down this road. And it was just in the middle of the day. And I was like, you rarely see those things. And then we talk about the owl as well in reference to Lilith here. And I know we got away from vampires here for a second. But when, going out, and research and stuff, for some reason, a lot of common sounds that people will report hearing, and we had it as well. My team did. I wasn't witness to it, but the guys heard it, and I trust them 100%. They said they heard what sounded like a very sick owl. Yeah. And then even when I was on searching for Sasquatch, Jason gave a hoot, and within a few, he did a call, and within a few minutes, we had a really weird owl answer back to us. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, so that's kind of a strange correlation there with the owls, Lilith, and a little bit of the Sasquatch and stuff. I want to bring that up. But since we're talking about, the whole Lilith thing and her coming with the vampire aspect, kind of a food for thought there. We're talking about Cain, being potentially the first vampire and going establishing cities and getting married and stuff. I'm trying to remember if we hear about Cain's wife or what her name was. What? I might try and Google that.
Yeah, I think that she came from the land of Nod, if I'm not mistaken. It's east of Eden, right? So he leaves Eden, and apparently there's these cities out there. But I think that what we're looking at is that it's almost simultaneously with the construction of the creation of Eden, as it is with the fall of the angels as well too. One third of the angels fall. So I think that all around, this is the way at least John Milton would have described it in Paradise Lost. So we have the paradise, and all around paradise is the domain of the evil ones, right? The ones that have fallen. And that's, you can bring the Nephilim into this kind of stuff and everything else like that. But yeah, absolutely. So the geographics of the land around Eden is very interesting. I mean, that's worthy of study as well too. And like I said, people have written books on this kind of stuff. But the idea that all around Eden was a kind of pandemonium, kind of like a no man's land. But have you found out what his wife's name was?
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Never mentioned.
Oh my goodness,
So
yeah.
okay. So on that note, if we're gonna go with Cain being the first vampire, what I mean, male vampire, Lilith being the first female vampire, what if Cain's first wife was Lilith?
There you go. That is a scary proposition. Absolutely. But yeah, I think that's something that we can go on. Absolutely, because Lilith was uh, rabbinic commentary, right? And we're just making commentary as well too. We're reading between the lines and we're trying to figure out what might be going on. But that does make some sort of literary sense. So I like it.
Yeah, one of the things stated was Adam and Eve had many children other than Cain and Abel, and I don't remember that mentioned in the Bible at all.
That's right.
Seriously. So if we're going to go off of that aspect right there of it being one of his sister or something, then we have the aspect of incest and all that going on.
Yeah.
Wouldn't we be all suffering from the effects of incest?
Right,
just throwing that out there.
But Lilith would not have been his mother. There would have been no biology there whatsoever. So this is actually making more and more sense.
So Lilith was Cain's wife, and Cain is credited as the first vampire, and Lilith is credited as being the first female vampire. With what she does in the supernatural paranormal world, what's funny is that we don't hear about Cain.
Right, we don't. That's right. He's kind of, buried, as it were, in the sands of time. But yeah, that's it. I wonder why. I don't know why. It's very possible that they wanted to, demonize women, which was a very common thing. This was the same time that we see like Leviticus coming together, and we have a lot of prohibitions against things like witchcraft and things that were typically female-oriented type of activities. So it's very possible that we put Cain into the background simply so we can make women seem far more dangerous. I would think.
Well, okay, so I mean, we could okay, so on a historical aspect, if we look at how women have been treated historically, which we know it's not been pretty at all, to demonize them too. I mean, so we got Helen of Troy. I mean, Troy was pretty much slaughtered because of Helen. There's so many times throughout history. It's trying to think of how to do this without trying to get myself banned or anything, because I'm definitely not trying to attack women at all whatsoever.
No, right.
No, because I think women are probably one of the strongest creatures on the planet, because there's a lot of things I can't give birth. There's no way I could do that.
That's right. If guys had to give birth, there would be like 10 kids out there.
No, the human species would have died out like, a millennia ago. I'm not going to.
Oh, exactly.
Pure and simple. But I think that there's some of the demonization came in through was because of maybe not necessarily a fear, because if you think about it, women are very smart. Women are very, they're good at what they do, at being women. Which is the complete opposite of man. You think about a man. What are we? We're gruntish, we're brutish. We're like, I'm man, I make fire. Women are soft and sensual. As they're featured that way. Gosh, nobody shadow ban me or anything. But there's some in the history of how we've treated women, I can't necessarily demonize, but I do think that there's a way, because, again, we got to use, we got to bring up the sex terminology. We got as PG as we can. The allure and stuff that a man has towards a woman. And that is a powerful, if you want to weaken a man, use sex.
Yeah, that's right. The feminine wiles.
Yes. And that's an honest, that's just being blunt, and truthful. That's why the temptation is always there. And as funny as whenever temptation is brought up, it's always a seductive female as the seductress.
Well, sure, absolutely. I mean, and we, to make just to kind of like punctuate this even more, in the Egyptian culture, their vampire goddess is Sekhmet, which is the symbol of a lion, but she's bloodthirsty. That's what makes her vampiric. But she is represented as having the head of a lion and naked breasts. So there's always this level of sexuality involved. Always. I mean, you're definitely talking about temptation. You're talking about a person, like a man, that will leave his reason behind and willingly go off into the wilderness to pursue something that will end up in his downfall, right? That's what's going on here. And vampires play a perfect scapegoat for that. But women also, we can see that, suffer no witch to live, which we have. Although it's also okay for a man to go get, the witch of Endor. It's okay for a man to go there to get some divination, because women have always been in touch with that other side, right? They are the bringers of light. They can do something that we cannot do. But that's also very frightening, especially whenever there's a group of people who have not yet established themselves as a civilization, like we see the Jews that will eventually establish Israel. So what you have here is a priestly class that is a completely made up of men, right? And then whenever you have a woman that is powerful or maybe even intuitive, then that becomes a danger to the power elite. That upsets male authority, and those women then have to be suppressed, or people may look at a woman for answers instead of a man.
I can see that. I can agree with, that taking place and their thought process on that one, which could help out with the allure of the vampire. Which is funny because, the vampire has also been known as a very sexual being, male and female. It was funny as it's progressed into modern culture into more of a male type of figure. So the male comes back in charge and the females are underlings, and I wonder too, though, since we brought up Cain earlier and how we just kind of got buried in the sands of time, if Cain is still around as still the first vampire, if Lilith is still around, or if Lilith has been perished and now it's her essence or spirit or whatnot that's roaming, and the thing of Cain is still there somehow. And of course, I'm doing a Hollywood. This
would be one hell of a movie, dude. Yeah,
there's a movie right there.
I hope there's a producer out there listening. Yes, sir.
So because so we can start moving into a little bit modern culture here, and because that's pretty much what we know of. People nowadays they're not gonna. They'll do a little dive of what we've done already into some of the biblical history, the history of the Egyptians, all these other cultures, and where the vampires come from, and some of their legends, the Wendigo with the Native Americans over here. Every Native American has a vampire type of creature. But let's talk about, so Hollywood comes in, and they do the first vampire movies, Nosferatu. Okay, black and white, silent film. And then, Bram Stoker was around for that, by the way, and sued because he's
right. His family, Bram Stoker was dead by now, but his family sued.
Oh, that's right. His family sued.
They would not give the rights over. So this was like a really early copyright case as well, too. So instead of calling this Dracula, they had to call it Nosferatu, which is borrowing from a Eastern European tradition. But it is Dracula. Only the names have changed.
Yep, it's Dracula to a T. So now we have this vampire movie comes out. People are afraid, it's a good scary movie. Hollywood is, starting to play around with some of it. And now stories are coming out. Books are, other books, playing on the same type of creature of Dracula. Transform into a bat, hypnotize, it can do this, it can do that. And, when I was a kid, the vampire fascinated me. And not to become one, but like I said, in the intro, was I wanted to be a vampire hunter. To me, these things were the essence of evil. And again, blood is the life. If you think about it, we got to have blood to live. They got to have blood to live. It's a creature that feeds on living blood And it's not the only creature that does it. We have the vampire bat that does it. Mosquitoes do it. A whole bunch of insects do. So I mean, the monarch will even eat blood, which is hilarious. A lot of people don't know that. To where, the monarch butterfly will eat blood. It'll land on a dead creature, and yeah.
That's great. I did not know that.
Yeah, the monarch butterfly. Isn't that crazy? So
Yeah, it is.
so every time I see a monarch butterfly now, I'm going, oh, you little bloodsucker. But so now we get into the modern history, well, the modern aspects of now of the vampire, and everybody likes to focus on, and I love this one, is I've gotten in numerous debates. Everybody's like, New Orleans, New Orleans, New Orleans. And I'm going, okay, you're going off Anne Rice. To where what's funny is that some of these novels, Anne Rice, excellent author, by the way, loved her books, and thoroughly enjoyed them. It was a really interesting take on, the vampire culture and the world that she created there, and makes you wonder if she had some inside information. But, for here in the New World, it always seems like it stems down from New Orleans. And I was curious if any of your research, if you were, could find out, if you figured out why. And I think the only reason why I would say New Orleans, people claim it, is because New Orleans is also home of, was at the time known for a lot of voodoo, a lot of Christian, a lot of, there's a lot of really interesting. And if you look at the layout of the city's, it's a beautiful city, by the way. I love New Orleans, but they have crypts. They're above ground. They rarely bury people because of the water table there and the floods and the hurricanes. And, so it kind of gives itself off as this haunted city, which would make a wonderful setting to create this supernatural world based out of.
Yeah, absolutely. Without a doubt, what you're saying is very, very true. So you have these trees laden with Spanish moss, right? There's alligators down there. There's cottonmouths. So, it's a dangerous place to begin with. And like you said, the water table was so close to the surface that you have to have the graves above ground, right? So there's always this, either remembrance of death or constant fear of death all over the place. And, you can imagine, back in the 1700s, would have been, swarms of mosquitoes and malaria and dysentery and all other kind of stuff. And people did know that. So, New Orleans was definitely a male-dominated city, right? This is where people went to get to work. This was a rough and tumble place, and they really didn't have any use for women. However, if you're a country and you want to establish a colony, you have to have families, and the French knew this, so they decided in the early 1700s that they were going to send a group of women to New Orleans to be the brides for these hardworking men down there. And these girls came to be known as the coffin girls or the casket girls, because whenever they came and they disembarked from the ship, they were carrying their belongings with them because they were never going to see home again. So everything that they owned was in these large suitcase type things, these things that look like coffins. So whenever you talk about earlier, one of the rules in vampire lore is that they have to sleep in dirt from their native land. So people seeing these women coming in looking like they're carrying coffins, people just assumed that the dirt was in there, and that gave rise to the vampires of New Orleans going back into the 1700s.
I agree completely. And I think it's just kind of funny about, with that going on, New Orleans being like the place in, over here in the New World, in the United States. I'll just stick with the United States because I keep wanting to say America, but America's a continent. So on that token too, though, like when we first met and, I saw your book about the vampire stuff, I brought up an author that I'd read in my teens, the late 80s and the early 90s, before I joined the military, by the name of Brian Lumley. And Lumley's take on the vampire was so fascinating, and even to this day, I just went through the books again, the original series of the Necroscope, books 1 through 5, and the way he wrote it, the way he built it, and the world that he created. What's really fun is that he wrote this, in the mid '80s, early '90s when he wrote these books. Now, Anne Rice had already had her little, her stuff out already, but Lumley's take on it was very unique, to where there's portals involved. To another dimension, another world. And that's where the vampire would come from. And so being older and doing the research that we do, talking about portals and interdimensional beings and stuff like that, to have Lumley come in and write, and his main, the main character, the protagonist is a guy by the name of Harry Keogh. And Harry Keogh has a very unique skill to where he's able to communicate with the dead. It calls himself a necroscope instead of a necromancer who tortures the dead. And, in his books, they torture the dead, and that's how a necromancer is able to get information and talk to them, is by torturing and hurting them. So a necroscope can be almost like a psychic and go, "Hello, Edna," and Edna goes, "Hello." But for his skill, he kind of has to be in a proximity to them for a first contact, but afterward he can communicate with them. Afterward.
You still there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you just went off for a second. You're good. You're good.
Okay. Whew. So, but just talking about what his skills are and everything. But the main antagonist in the series, though, vampires, and that's what I found fascinating about it. Out of any crazy paranormal creature, he used vampires, and for the longest time through the whole series. In most of the, vampire lores and everything, you have the cross, you have holy water, you have all, none of that is brought into it. What is brought into it, though, is the use of silver, garlic, fire, beheading, and where the vampire comes from. And what's fascinating about how he wrote it, and I'm giving away spoilers here, you guys, on the book, is the vampire is a type of a slug. Okay? That comes out of a swamp. It's funny you mentioned the moors earlier. So it comes out of, it's a sluggish type of creature that melts into your skin pretty much, and it settles at the base of your neck. And what it does is once this thing melds in with you, it takes over your nervous system. It controls your muscles. It does all. It gives you telepathy, all through that stuff. But the only way to feed it is through blood. And that could either be through a beast or it could be through a person. And, these things do have superhuman strength. Now, they can't transform in the bats. They can't transform in the wolves. But what they can do is they can, time with communication with this parasite, which is a good way to describe it as a parasite, is they can meld their flesh so they can create foil so they can glide, per se. And he goes into great detail on the biology of what this thing does to a human. And what got me even too on that one was, so not only can the slug attach itself to a human, but it can attach itself also to other creatures, like a wolf.
I gotcha. Yeah, I do like this, and I did a little bit of a deep dive whenever you were talking to me about this, because I didn't have a working familiarity with this, but also I think it also reminds you of like the leech as well too, doesn't it? This is a blood-sucking type of creature that can, really, do a lot of damage if it's left untreated. But no, I do like where this is coming from, because it gives it almost a very natural, but also very frightening aspect as well too.
Well, what's funny too is, so this parallel world where it comes, where this vampire leech comes from, and there's one spot in our planet at the time where it can come through. It's in Romania, of all places, right? And so in this other dimension, they would throw their so they would have their own vampire clans, their own vampire communities, their own vampire wars, and they would take vampire losers, and throw them into this wormhole thing, this white sphere, and they would walk through and pop out in our world, but they were in a cave. And, the legend is how, vampires are afraid of running water, blah, 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 one of those things. Well, this
Right,
cave
right,
had
right.
a natural river in it. And so if the vampire was strong enough, he could survive the river, he'd end up in our world. He would come through the cave and survive and be in our world. And of course, sunlight does kill him, right?
Oh.
And the only way to kill them is to behead them and burn them. You have to burn the body because of the slug is in there, because the leech will escape and try and find another host. And to create another vampire, there's two ways. You can either create what they call a vampiri, which is like them that has the leech, or when they bite somebody, they can transfer, or if they have intercourse with somebody, they can transfer part of their essence into that human, and that could turn them into like a vampire thrall.
I gotcha. Yes, yes,
So,
yes.
but for them to turn another person, or another creature, is they form an egg, and they, in their mouth, and they pretty much spit or they transfer it through a kiss, this egg to the other person, and
All right.
it's crazy. And what got me too, though, was through the whole series, there was no mention of like God anywhere at all. And I was going, okay, all right, so being 50 and going through this stuff again, I'm going, okay, there's got to be something to it. And the first vampire in this other world was Shaitan,
All right, right, right.
which turned it around into Satan.
I see. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
he was created in that other place he fell, and he couldn't remember where he fell from. At the end of the 5 books, Harry, ironic enough, dies crucified. There's the irony there. He's been turned to a vampire at this point in time. He's vampire. He dies crucified, and when he dies, he ends up finding out to where these things are talking to him, saying, "Hey, look, sorry, your time is done, but the next part of you will have to continue on to redo this again." And yeah, to where it's like a never-ending kind of cycle
Process.
thing. Yeah, and it just kind of,
Yeah.
and then it shows, and then even Shaitan shows up on this other plane of existence, and they're by a swamp, and trying to figure out what's going on, and the leech gets him.
Oh, right, right. Yeah, see, and as we look over what we've discussed today, we've basically covered 14,000 years of a tradition that is still constantly evolving, right? So we've had, this kind of otherworldly sci-fi type of element that you just discussed. With Twilight, we have the glittering vampires. So even now, even though it's been around for so long, the archetype is there. But what a vampire is still morphing with each generation. And that's what makes this such a fascinating field of study, is because, every generation can kind of investigate why the vampire is important and how it has changed to morph into the importance of that particular generation.
Okay, so you brought up Twilight, and I'm glad you did, because that was one of the other points I want to bring up, is we're talking about modern culture. So if we look back at Nosferatu,
Yep.
scary, horrible, evil monster. Okay, let's talk about Twilight.
Alrighty.
I mean, I only watched the one movie, and it was just my daughter wanted to watch it, and I didn't think she would like it. Oh my gosh. I mean, it was just, it could not get, I mean, it went against everything that I know about the vampire. And
Yes, yeah.
they turned it into a very romantic, more sexual, more everything, to where, I mean, the fangirling that was going on about it was absolutely crazy. And to where the vampire got turned into almost a teddy bear. And I'm
Right.
wondering on some levels if the reason why we allowed that to happen was to demonize them and to make it a little bit more acceptable for vampires to be here.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff going on. So whenever I was in college, I had a great medieval professor, and he came up with this term called. This happens a lot in literature and in art in the Middle Ages, an outward manifestation of an inward spiritual state. So oftentimes, things, especially when we look at Nosferatu, they were depicted as ugly because their essence was ugly. So what we now see in Twilight is these beautiful teenagers that, through no fault of their own, are are in a purgatory, right? This kind of living purgatory, and they are wrestling with the idea of what they are, and the glittering kind of represents a soul, in that they are still worthy of redemption. I think that is what we're going on, and there have been people that studied this in length as well too. But what we see is a beautiful persona, because inside they are not condemned and they're not lost forever. They're still grappling with what they are. They don't want to be what they are, and they're not monstrous, but they have monstrosity thrust upon them.
Okay, so I can go with that to a point, but I also think that I'm going to go with the fact of the matter, back to Lumley's work, is that even if a great person, a good person, gets turned into either a vampire thrall or, vampiri, the human side, the good, decent human side of them is pretty much gone. And,
right, sure.
And
sure.
I think that what they were trying to do and what they've been trying to do since then with a lot of these cute little vampire shows and all these little happy little things about vampires and stuff is turning them into, hey, it's okay. Yeah, we're not bad, and it's where to take the fear away of an actual full blown cryptid creature that has been around, as you said, I mean, that we know for 14,000 years or more, written talking about it through the Bible, because the Bible didn't say specifically, do not consume human flesh, don't do blood. I mean, no, 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 no. And now it's almost like, oh, Team Jacob, Team Edward.
Right. Sure.
There's little vampire cartoon shows. And, it almost feels as though they're taking it and they're cartooning it and they're making it more easier for kids, softer for kids, because Twilight wasn't targeted for adults. It was targeted for teen girls.
Sure. Yeah, because it sells posters and it sells, pillowcases. People want these sexy vampires. My daughter Willow fell into this trap as well too, and she was obsessed with Vampire Diaries, to the point that we actually visited Covington, Georgia, because that's where Vampire Diaries was filmed. It's this idea of the bad boy, but to the next level, right? This bad boy can kill you, although he doesn't want to, that kind of a thing. And what you said is true. I mean, this might be some sort of psyops thing if you look deeply enough into it, to kind of say, vampires live amongst us, but they're really not that bad. I mean, you could go to that conspiracy theory if you want to, but yes, definitely you can see that they're ever evolving. They're not these frightening, grotesque creatures anymore. These are the things that would take you to the prom and beat up your bully or whatever. This is what's going on now.
You're right. I do think there is a side to it, because that's only been happening for about the past 15 years. And to where if you look at the vampire movies from the 80s and even the 90s, we'll even do Bram Stoker's Dracula with Keanu Reeves and Winona Ryder. Yeah, I mean, they had oh gosh, Gary, his name is escaping me. Gary
Oldman.
Oh yeah, who played Dracula. He came across as this, attractive, good looking, but when his true vampiric form was there, he was not. And even the three maidens that he had in his castle, they appeared at first, but they can only hold that persona for so long before their true self would show through.
Right.
And we've taken that away now, and to where they're like, oh no, they're all sexy and they're all attractive, and they're really good things that just have to live on us, you know?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it went from eating babies to now, drinking Chardonnay and things like that. It went a big leap, right? A big leap. Now that they only feast on the blood of cattle and they won't even kill the cows, right? They've become almost like a living version of a mosquito.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what, and I'm going, no, not at all. Vampire, and that's the thing is, and I think that's what they've been trying to do. Even with Anne Rice's work, in a lot of ways, she was portraying that, but she did also paint Lestat as, he's not a really good guy or a good vampire.
Yeah.
He does some really bad things. And she took a lot of, but again, she put a lot of that attractiveness, that sexual prowess and everything into it to make it more almost alluring for young people. And it seems like we seem to be targeting young people with a lot of this psyop stuff to make them, more susceptible to the dark side. I'll just be blunt. Yeah. To the dark side of it.
Right. No, that's true. You look at Hollywood, you look at anything. No matter what business you're in, you will find people that have agendas. And whatever that agenda happens to be, people usually follow the marching. They march along because they want to be included. And I think what you're saying is correct. I'm not a huge conspiracy theorist, but I definitely see the shift in Hollywood, not to make things so black and white. We aren't supposed to believe anymore that there is real evil out there, right? It's kind of muddied it down. There's no spiritual warfare going on. It is really kind of different than anything we looked at before. Even 40 Days of Night, which was, there was a terrifying movie about vampires. But even then, the overriding analysis of the movie was very atheistic. There was no God to come and save you. And I think that's the trend. We are moving into a state of humanism that we've never seen, to the point that God and even ethics and morality are being ruled out, right? We're pushing that to the side. So what you have left then is glittering vampires with really their own moral code, right? It's not as cut and dry as it was whenever we were confronting Bela Lugosi. It's much more muddied, and it's much more difficult to navigate the world of the 21st century vampire.
I agree 100%. And I'm wondering, because, when I was starting this, this dive about vampires, it was about a year. I've always been fascinated with vampires. I really have been. It's just one of those things. Oh, wow, my sensor light just came on in the garage.
I hope it's not a vampire. Yeah, exactly.
All right. But there's nobody in here. Huh. Anyways, so when I started this, journey and dive into, my thing was to dispel it. In all honesty, it really, really was. It was to dispel it. And, going through Brian Lumley's books again, and I reference his books a lot, even though it is fiction, but the way he wrote it and the way he digs into the biology, the psychology of the vampire is, it's almost like it's not fiction, if that makes any sense. And, of course, he's passed on, because I was going to try and email him and be like, hey, I want to talk to you about this. But in one of the interviews that I did read about him, they asked him, where was his inspiration for the books? And he said that, his father had passed away, and he always thought he'd want to know how to be able to talk to his dad still. And I was like, well, that's kind of cool, but how did you take that into this crazy, almost like, seriously, like a guide to vampires? Mm-hmm. And it goes to, it's, Ron, it's absolutely crazy. But I do think in some aspect, I do think the vampire is still alive and well. I do think that I don't think they're in government. I don't think they're doing stuff like that. I do think they're behind the scenes in certain aspects of our life. When it does come to potentially Hollywood, or maybe some aspects of government, but not so much because there's too much spotlight and everything going on, where you'd be called out on it. But there's too many weird things that do take place in the music world, into Hollywood. What I mean? There's something to it, if that makes sense.
It does. It does make sense. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think that the world is vastly different from whenever we were kids, right? For instance, Billie Eilish, who I always saw as kind of innocuous, kind of a pop girl thing. But my girls were listening to her album one day, and she has a song that the very first line is "My Sweet Satan." Like, who talks about this kind of stuff? Like, things have shifted to the point now where things are kind of turned upside down, right? I mean, things that were once not. I'm not even talking about blasphemy or anything like that. I'm talking about just things that were like morally accepted, like, has been turned around to the point that, as you said a little bit earlier, vampires are now attractive.
Yeah. Yeah, vampires, they're 100% attractive now. Everything about the vampires is attractive. Everything that they do is attractive. It seems to be everywhere.
Uh-huh.
And it's everywhere, but nowhere at the same time. It seems there's this underlying current. There'll always be the big things that pop up. There'll be this and be that. And one of the movie Sinners that just came out. I don't know if you've seen that one or not.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes.
Loved it. And to me, what I loved about how they did the movie Sinners was they took a lot of, you mentioned it earlier, Ireland, and with some of the Fae there in Ireland, and they brought that to the vampire world.
That's right. We've never seen anything like that before. It was really, really good because, like I said, this was your typical vampire romp.
No, this is back to old school. Vampires are bad. You know what I mean? Vampires are bad. Vampires are evil, and this is this is how they are. This is what they're going to do. And I think that needed to be very excellent movie. Excellent. No, I don't want to give anything away for anybody who hasn't seen it yet. If you haven't seen the movie Sinners, y'all definitely go watch it because very well done. Even the ship, the Detmer.
The Demeter. Right, yeah. Right.
I didn't agree with the ending per se, but I did like the story, and they did make it an ugly vampire.
That's right. They sure did. You got your money's worth with that.
Yeah, it was a great movie. Yeah, I didn't like the end of it, but I do like what they did with, the story of the ship that transported Dracula's body, from Romania to England. And I loved how they did that. Yep. I did too. And I do think that vampires do need to be called out for what they really are. And it goes all the way back to, I don't know, but we've done, man, I could do this all night long.
Oh man, I'll tell you what, and my voice lasted, which I am surprised. And you held up pretty good as well too. I got a little nasally there at times, but I was able to make it through, my friend. But the thing is, though, when we talk about like the vampire or really anything, there are many more rabbit holes to go down. So I would love to be able to come back and have a great conversation about these things again. I really do enjoy it. I think you do a remarkable job. Really investigating, because this is an investigation into the world of the paranormal and supernatural, and kind of try to connect the dots so it makes sense not only from a completely skeptical point of view, but also from the more supernatural point of view, because we're in this to look at all sides. And when we investigate things like vampires, it's okay to be skeptical, but also it's also very frightening to notice that there's a lot of similarities and probably truths involved as well too.
I agree 100%. And I'm surprised my voice has lasted. You sounded great, to be honest with you. We're still recording.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate it. A little bit of the nasally thing going on with the sinus infection, but the voice is still holding up a little bit. A little squeaky, but still holding up.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I'm proud of my throat. It's doing great. Because I took some chloroseptic before we started. I was like, oh, come on, because I don't want to postpone any shows or anything unless I'm sick.
Sure.
I love the conversation. I love this topic. Yes, I'm going to have you back on again. Obviously you're gonna, yeah, definitely. We are talking about doing a Patreon episode here soon. So for those of you who want to hear more of some of these topics, me and Ron are going to do a great Patreon episode, and the only way to find out what it's going to be about is you're going to have to log in to Patreon. But
tune in. That's right.
That'll be dropping here in probably about the next week or so, you guys. But anyways, Ron, I do want to say thank you very much for taking the time out tonight to come on and visit with me again. I enjoy our conversations. I do. And I'll be honest with you, we've been doing this for almost an hour and a half, and I could probably go another hour and a half on the vampire. I really could.
Oh, wow. There's still more things to uncover and still more crypts to open up. But we will do that another time, I assure you.
Yeah, we'll do a part 2. We'll do a vampire part 2, and we'll talk offline. We'll get that scheduled. It'll probably be next month, but we'll get that scheduled and try and bring on. We might bring a third party on for that one.
Sounds good.
I love it. All right, well, Ron, tell everybody real quick where they can find your stuff at again.
Ron-cryptoguru.com is my website. You can also find me on Facebook, Ronald Murphy Jr., or you can go to Amazon. Ronald L. Murphy Jr. is my name, and you can find my books there. And if you want to reach me directly, Ronald L. Murphy Jr. at yahoo.com. Ronald L. Murphy Jr. at yahoo.com, and you can reach me directly if you need to talk to me.
So my personal email is at yahoo.com one as well. That's pretty funny.
It's been out there for a while, and it was my original college email, and we had to use our entire name, and there was another Ron Murphy that went to the school, so I have to use the middle initial L, and a lot of people forget that, but it's Ronald L. Murphy Jr. at yahoo.com, and that's just because that was my college login.
That was my email was from when I was in the Army.
There you go.
So,
you go.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Another life ago, another world ago.
It feels like it. Sometimes it does. It feels like two separate people.
Absolutely.
But again, I wouldn't be where I'm at today if it wasn't for what I did in the service and everything. But again, Ron, thank you very much for coming on, sir. And obviously, don't hang up or anything else like that. I'll close everything out. So I'm just going to mute you just for a second. All right, ladies and gentlemen, wow. So digging into the vampire aspect of everything in life, and there's so many ways you can look at the vampire. You can look at the vampire as maybe a subconscious fear that man has of things that go bump in the night, things that feast on us, go down the uncanny valley, check that out as well, that a potential for it. But, there is some sort of allure that man has always had when it comes to the vampire. Think about that. There's something about that. So until next time, everybody, y'all stay safe out there. And again, keep liking and subscribing. I do appreciate all the help out there. If you've had an encounter and you want to come on the show, email me, drunkencryptids@gmail.com.
I can do anything that I want. I can do anything that I want now. I can do anything that I want. Hey, hey, if it is to be, that it's up to me. I'm headed to the front. I can be anything that I want. I can be anything that I want now. I can be